are rolling down the track, me to love and daddy ain't coming back, 'cause I'm moving on. I'm rolling on.
My father, Charles Patrice Bouvier, was DNHO from Fort Providence, Northwest Territories. He was sent to residential school where he got tuberculosis. My mother, Violet Mary Blood, was from the Blood Reserve in southern Alberta. She also got tuberculosis from a residential school. When my father was sent to the Charles Camsell Indian Hospital, my mother had already been there for 2 years. They were there together for 5 more years. My father's line was traced to Francisco Bellinou I, who came to Fort Hope from France and married a Red Indian, Ethiba. Their son, Francisco Bellinou II, was a guide for Fraser up the Mackenzie River. My father's great-great-grandmother, Catherine Bellinou Bouvier Lamoureux, was the matriarch of Fort Providence. There's a story of her and 3 other women taking a dog sled to Reyetso, a 4-day ride to get food for the starving community. She outlived 3 husbands. She also embraced the Catholic Church. Dad's family trapped for the priests and the RCMP, embracing people who came into the community, making sure that they had food and wood. Dad would not go back into the church. He never spoke about it. My parents never spoke about the schools or the hospital. I had to do the research. At the archives, we found photos of my father and mother, and 2 letters from my mother when she was in the Camsell. I watched the seasons go by, she wrote to a relative, but I cannot touch or smell them. At residential school, the priest decided who the girls would marry once they were 16 or so. There would be group weddings, all of these young people. She chose my father instead. My father was a talented guitar player and singer, and when he was 17, another gifted musician, Harry Russ, landed in the bed next to him at Charles Camsell. He and Dad adored Hank Snow, who actually came and played in the Camsell. Harry gave me photos of my father and Hank. When Dad and Mom went back to our reserve, my grandmother was not impressed. My father came with nothing but skills and talents and good looks, but my uncles embraced him, and the Grey Nuns loved him because he spoke French. People needed a pass to leave the reservation, but being a non-status, my father could go anywhere he wanted. Then in 1960, Native people became citizens and the pass system was dissolved. Also, they could buy alcohol, which had a huge effect on families. Before that, they would make home brew or trade with the Hutterites for wine. Although the doctors told my mother she couldn't have children, I have 7 siblings, 3 older sisters and 4 brothers. Both my parents were Roman Catholic, and the church was always present in our lives. Eventually, my mother left my father. There were many factors, including racism. He was a carpenter by trade, a diamond driller. He worked in mines and rigs. We were uprooted a lot, and the camp jobs would take him away for long periods of time. Dad came back into our lives when Mom passed away. Mom died when she was 45 and I was 16. Dad was still dealing with his past and struggled with addiction to alcohol, and he'd say, "It should have been me, not your mother." I'd say, "Yes, it should have been." When I was 23 and had my daughter, I stopped being mad at him. "You never mind what people think. We're all going to raise this baby together," he told me. We both lived in Calgary at the time. He'd say, "Your old man's been from coast to coast living off coffee and toast." And if he was going somewhere, he'd say, "This Bouv is on the move." He kept working at camp jobs. If he didn't have work, alcohol would consume his time. When my sister and I were going to Red Deer College, he'd visit and look after Amber. That was a lifesaver. Every Friday when he'd get paid, he'd take Amber and I out to dinner. Once her chicken fingers were cold and my chicken was raw. "I love my meal," he said. He always got a steak. I filled out a complaint card and signed my dad's name, and a week later he gets this letter with a free coupon. "I love that restaurant," he said. I didn't tell him it was me. He wished me into psych nursing. When he died, I had phantom pains. We were studying the heart and nursing, and I went into my sister's to tell her my fingers were numb and tingly. "You're just turning into a hypochondriac," she said. When I got home, there was a phone call that my dad had died. We all drove up to Yellowknife and met the Bouvier family. Dad died at 56. My daughter Amber was 5. It was so hard. He's buried in Yellowknife, thousands of miles away from my mother, both of them laying in their territories. At his memorial, the priest was swinging the incense holder, and some of the ashes flew into the cuff of his pants. Suddenly he seemed to be dancing. His pants were burning. My dad must have done that. He had a great sense of humor. I was filled with loss when we drove back from the funeral. We stopped at Enterprise, the gas station, and there was writing on the washroom wall: "No matter how far I may travel, my heart and soul will always belong in the North." My father sends me little messages of hope. Whenever I go somewhere, I say to my mom and dad, "Jump in, we're going on a trip," so their essence can come with me. My father was loving to everyone. That's something I keep with me.
I said, "Listen, bud, I've traveled every road in this here land. I've been everywhere